Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we are looking at this 4th gen Ram. Seems to be an issue with the brakes on this. So as you're driving down the road, it tends to pull to the left a little bit. And after about 6-7 miles of driving, this wheel will start to smoke. So it's getting hot, so something's freezing up on this, most likely the caliper or the brake hose. With the wheel off the ground, it is super hard to turn. You can tell it's kind of, brakes are seizing up. Something's binding. Or actually the caliper itself is not letting go. Wheel off, I can see the caliper. Here's the brake hose that I'm thinking is the problem. That's what I'm going to be changing today. Now in most cases, it is usually the caliper and the brake hose. So you want to change them both together. Like I said, I don't think the issue is in the caliper. What I did was, and which is the first thing you want to do, here's your bleeder screw, 10 millimeter. You want to make sure that comes loose. In case if you're just changing the brake hose and later you will need to bleed the system, and if your bleeder screw does not come loose or if it breaks off, you're going to end up changing the caliper anyways. The brakes on this are good, probably 85% or so. What happens usually over time, these rust up, these metal ends on them, they start to rust up on the inside, and that's what collapses them. So the hose most likely is collapsing internally. So we'll change that, and then hopefully that should take care of the problem. Again, in most cases, you do want to change the caliper and the hose at the same time. That will usually solve all your issues if you're having sticking brakes. Or you know, one side or the other is hanging up, or both sides. This I found is a very common issue with the Rams. I've changed just the calipers before to find a couple months later it's still doing the same thing, and it's usually the hose that's doing it. So it's a good idea to change them both at the same time. Hose, you want to make sure this bolt comes loose, which is a 15 millimeter, and then you have a 12 millimeter bolt here that needs to come off, and then this is your brake hose, and if you look at the other side of that hose is where your metal brake line comes in right here. This is a 12 millimeter here. You want to penetrate those or use some heat, whatever you need to do. Heat usually works well. So that needs to come off. This bolt needs to come off, and your banjo bolt on the caliper itself needs to come off to replace this hose. Before removing this nut here that holds the hose to this bracket, is to loosen up the line that's behind it. You want to make sure that comes loose. You want some type of a container at the bottom, because once you do have that loose, you will have some brake fluid starting to leak out of there. So you want a little catch can at the bottom, and go ahead and loosen up this 12 millimeter nut or a bolt here. You should be able to remove your line. There's nothing holding it from the back anymore. Sometimes it tend to get stuck. And this is the other end of it. I'll put a plastic cap on there. Otherwise, you're going to empty out your master cylinder, because it'll keep leaking brake fluid out of there until it's all sealed up. So I've got a cap on there holding the fluid in. Now we'll work on the other end of this hose. There is a little clip in the center which holds the ABS cable to it. Just by pulling it, you can remove that from there. Now the other end of it with the banjo bolt is right on the caliper, which is a 15 millimeter. We will go ahead and remove that. So our line is completely off of the caliper. Now you do want to save this banjo bolt. You will be reusing this. There is 2 washers on here on each end. You can see that here. They're copper washers. Most of the time when you purchase a new brake hose, it will come with these new copper seals. So that you can discard. So here is our new brake hose. You want to make sure that it's identical to the one you took off. So here's our old one and a brand new one here. It looks similar. It actually is exact same. And our banjo bolt, again, that's the one we were using. I just cleaned it up. And again, your new brake hose does come with the new copper seals. One will go on each side of the banjo bolt. This goes through here, goes right through the brake line here, and seals will go just like so. So we have our new line here in position. We have our 15mm bolt here back in. Again, you want to make sure those copper washers, one goes on the outside and one on the inner side. We'll go ahead and tighten that up here. Okay, so once that's tight, our other end, we can go ahead and slip that into position here. You don't want to put that bolt in yet. You want to take this cap off that we put on here to prevent the brake fluid from leaking. What this will do, if you tighten this up, you might not have enough room to tighten this into that. So you want to put that into position here. You want to take that cap off, and you want to get that line started into the brake hose here before you tighten this bolt up in here. Our brake line threaded in to our hose here. This is in position. It's still loose. We've got the 12mm bolt under here back into position. We'll go ahead and tighten that up. Our 12mm line wrench, and we can fully tighten up the brake line in the back. Now at this point, we're ready to go ahead and bleed the system. We'll go ahead and loosen up the cap on our master cylinder here for your brake fluid. You want to make sure there's enough fluid in it. On the caliper, if you remember a bleeder screw, that's a 10mm. We'll go ahead and give that a turn or two, loosen that up, and you'll see eventually it might take a minute or two for the air to bleed from there, and you'll start solid fluid flowing through there. You'll see that eventually. Sometimes it just doesn't want to do that. You might have to have somebody sit in the vehicle with the master cylinder cap back on and push the pedal, and you can bleed it that way. So let's give this a few minutes, and it should start flowing. You want to make sure you don't completely empty out your master cylinder, so keep an eye on that. You want to fill that as needed. I did wire brush your bleeder screw just to clean it up a little bit. But now it is loose. You can see there's fluid starting to flow out of there. Again, what you're trying to do is get all the air out. I did see some bubbles, but at this time looks like the bubbles are done. Go ahead and tighten up our bleeder screw. Okay. We'll check our master cylinder level. Looks like we're right about just under max. That should be okay. We'll put the cap back on it. We'll get in the truck and see how the pedal feels. Once we've depressed the pedal a few times, we'll go ahead and repeat the bleed cycle again. I loosened it up already. There is no bubbles. I do see some fluid coming out of there, but there is no bubbles. Pedal feels good. So we'll go ahead and tighten that back up. Put the master cylinder cap on it. Top off the level. We'll clean up our mess here. So at this time I have everything cleaned up. I did take some brake cleaner and sprayed the whole area where the brake fluid had leaked out. You don't want to leave that there. That tends to cause rust. It'll eat up any paint that's around it. So that's all cleaned up at this time. Our brake pedal feels good. There's no leaks anywhere. Master cylinder is topped off where it should be. So we'll put the wheel back on, take the truck for a drive, and make sure that's taken care of our problem that we had with the brake season on this side and hanging up on us and causing the rotor and the whole system to overheat on this side. Now again, you should change them with the caliper. That way you eliminate all the issues. I do have different set of calipers for this truck. I want to paint them red before I put those on, so I will be replacing that later on, and we'll do a separate video on replacing the calipers or painting them on the truck. I have this side caliper. I'll be painting the other one on the truck. I'll be replacing this with a different one that I have that's already painted. So we'll do a separate video on that, but at this time we'll take the truck for a drive. I was able to take the vehicle for a drive. Drives great, no issues. Brakes no longer stick. Here is a caliper that I've had left over from another project that never got used. It was painted red, so I want to put this new caliper on the truck. We've changed the hose already, and that issue on that truck has been solved. I knew it was a hose. Previously, I had removed the caliper on that truck, and when I was moving the pistons, they're kind of not very easy to go back in. So what I ended up doing was loosening up the bleeder screw on that caliper on the truck, and the pistons were moving in and out freely. So I knew the issue had to be in the hose. So we changed the hose on that and solved that issue. Another thing you want to check is these slide pins that are on the bracket. This is what holds your caliper to the bracket. Sometimes if these are not lubricated, they'll tend to jam up in here, rust up, and that'll cause issues with brakes wearing uneven or seizing up or sticking, what have you. So you want to also make sure these are lubricated and freed up. So stay tuned. I'll be putting this caliper on the truck also, and then I will also show you how to paint the rest of the calipers to match this one. Thank you for watching.